and Ukraine. We're going to be looking at what has been happening, the motives behind this invasion, and what the world leaders are saying. We're going to be discussing this with some very informed panelists on how international relations works. We are going to also be handling this with some of us who work with the house out here in at My Media Prime TV, Fengudro Mbange in Douala, Cameroon's economic capital. I am in the studio with Gwladys Bomotonguina. She is a journalist. Good morning, Gwladys. I'm glad to have you share in this edition of the program.
Merci beaucoup, Mr. Léo. C'est un plaisir pour moi d'être sur ce plateau pour discuter des situations qui concernent le monde, d'un drame qui est en train de se produire dans notre monde. Et de toutes les façons, nous avons notre mot à dire parce que si nous ne disons rien, si nous ne faisons rien, personne ne le fera à notre place. Okay.
We also are going to be having the participation of Maittre Ndive. He is the leader of the British Cameroon National Party, BCNP. He's going to be coming live through Skype. We're glad to have you, Matt.
Hello, Matt. Can you hear me?
With us. Seemingly, Matt cannot get us. There is an issue with the audio. Matt, can you get me?
I can hear you.
Okay, we are glad to have you on this special edition today. We'll start by getting your first reaction to what is happening to Europe and the world.
Yeah, good morning and thank you for having me on this program. And my personal reaction, I like to limit European problems to European countries, because when they have a European problem, it's a world problem. When we have a problem in Africa, it's an African problem. But however, what I can see happening between Russia and Ukraine, I can see a Mexican standoff is a Russian roulette. It's something that started as far back as 2014, when Crimea was annexed by Russia. But I cannot sit here today and solely blame Russia. It's, again, President Zelensky of Ukraine said that they have left them to rot alone, to defend themselves alone. There was something that they call the Budapest Memorandum, which was signed and agreed on the 5th of December 1994 by the United States of America, by Britain, and later on France and China. They asked Ukraine to give up their nuclear power, and that is what is happening today. Today they are not able to protect Ukraine. But the problem is, some people say Putin is a Hitler today. Today's Hitler. But what Putin is doing, Putin have got a nuclear warhead, and that's very dangerous. So that's why I say it is a Mexican standoff. It's no win-win situation for any person. Everybody in the West is trying to flex their muscles, because what is happening today is that we used to have, they have NATO, which is North Atlantic Treaty for most Western countries. Russia used to have what we call the Warsaw Pact, which was to counterbalance what is happening in the Western world, and it was mainly made up of Soviet Union. Today we don't have that Warsaw Pact. So at the end of the day, I can see both sides of what they are saying. Russia is entitled to defend themselves, in the sense that what Russia is saying is that Ukraine is not living in the sky or in the air. They are sharing borders with Russia. So Russia have to protect themselves. What is happening is that in an international community, you don't only look at the Western country. We know about the Cuba crisis, when there was a nuclear warhead facing the United States of America, and we knew what happened, the reaction. Nobody wants to face insecurity. And if you see the United Nations, which was created in 1945, what's their aim? To maintain international peace and security. Are we saying that United Nations have failed today? People like President Mugabe and Gaddafi, they were trying to reform the United Nations, they were laughing at them. And today, the United Nations have become another league of nations because to some extent it's a failed organization because there are some few people who want to control the world. What I sit here to tell you what is happening in Ukraine is a double standard. We have seen what is happening with the Palestinians. They are encroaching on the territory. And so it's not the first thing. It has been happening in other parts of the world. But because the Western world, they think that Europe is different from Africa. When it's a war, they call it world war. When it's something that's good, it doesn't concern Africa. My personal point is, I feel sorry for the civilians in Ukraine. It saddens me to see children, women in the street, and what is happening to them as a human being. But these powers, when they flex their muzzle, as we say in Cameroon, when two elephants are fighting, it's the grass that suffer. It is their problem. It is about who can control who. And Putin doesn't want to give up. It is a Russian roulette. There is no win-win situation. And at the end of the day, they will come back to each other and try to solve their problem. Because United Kingdom and other European countries have given some sanction to, is it Russia? They are targeting Putin's inner circle, banning state-owned companies in the UK financial market. They are targeting the oligarch. They have banned Aeroflot, which is Russian airline. They are trying to do SWIFT financial system they are trying to talk with other European countries to ban Russia. But the mistake they are making, sanctions take a long, long time in order for you to achieve what you want. Russia have got a reserve of $630 billion, the fourth highest amount of reserve in the world. Only 16% of Russian foreign exchange are in dollars. So down to what, 40% about 5 years ago. So at the end of the day, there's no win-win situation. I believe they will come together as superpower to solve their problem. And without saying that I'm happy with what is going on, it tells you that when countries like France, they annex or control other countries in Africa, they are silent. When people attack Palestinians and encroach on their land, they are silent. So sometimes God works in a mysterious way. Besides the civilians that I empathize with them in Ukraine, I think sometimes things like this happen to make people to get to their senses.
Okay, things like this happen to make people to get to their senses. With Gwladys, you've seen pictures, images coming out from Ukraine after the invasion by Russia. Not very good for the world.
Effectivement, Monsieur Léo, c'est triste de voir à quel point la vie humaine au jour d'aujourd'hui ne compte plus. Pour des raisons politiques, parce que lorsque tu cherches à comprendre un peu la raison pour laquelle la Russie réagit au jour d'aujourd'hui de cette manière, tu te rends compte que c'est juste pour un problème de dépendance de l'énergie nucléaire. Et on se pose véritablement la question de savoir, est-ce que les vies humaines ne valent pas plus que cette technologie? Est-ce qu'au jour d'aujourd'hui, les vies des hommes sur cette partie du pays, du continent, ne valent pas mieux que cette dépendance à l'énergie nucléaire? On se rend compte que ici c'est un problème de je suis le plus fort, je suis celui qui doit être toujours au top, je dois être celui toujours qui dirige, celui qui prend les décisions, et puis les autres pays comme peut-être l'Ukraine au jour d'aujourd'hui malheureusement doivent simplement suivre les directives de Poutine. C'est triste, Monsieur Léo, de voir à quel point on est insensible, de savoir que des innocents vont périr, que des vies innocentes vont couler, et simplement parce qu'on a des visions de diriger, de commander, à peu importe la manière.
Okay, let's get to Boya and find out from the editor-in-chief of Mediafric Radio tell us whether this move has any justification whatsoever. Joseph Bueno. We can't get the sound. Eli.
The United States Republic, the Russian invasion of Ukraine is complete unprovoked aggression. For crying out loud, we are in the 21st century. We're no longer in the 19th century, where we saw the world wars, where aggressors could do as they pleased. The United Soviet Socialist Republic went defunct since in the early 90s, and Ukraine has since then been a sovereign state. There's no justification in the 21st century that another country will consider a sovereign state like its sphere of influence, because it is on the basis of this that Vladimir Putin of Russia believes that he should have a say on how things are done in Ukraine, and also trying to justify the invasion of Ukraine by the fact that he's protecting the Russian-speaking populations of Ukraine in Luhansk and Donetsk. This is a sovereign state we're talking about, for crying out loud. So there's no justification whatsoever in the 21st century that another state invades another in the name of protecting Russian-speaking people in Ukraine, a country that's sovereign, like I said. Since Ukraine had its independence from the United Soviet Socialist Republic in the early 90s, when the USSR broke down, Russia has never really taken this lightly. And that's why they continue every now and then to have a foothold in Ukraine. We saw in 2014 how they took advantage.
I don't know, Maittre, Alex, I don't know whether you followed the editor-in-chief of Mediafric Radio, who says there is just no reason for us to...
Can you say it again?
I don't know whether you followed the editor-in-chief there. That's the editor-in-chief of Mediafric Radio, coming in from Boya, who says there is no justification in the 21st century for a nation to invade another very sovereign nation in this manner.
Of the countries in the world. What I'll tell you, what I'll say, I wouldn't disagree with the other panelists who was talking about, but I will make one point clear. When Viktor Yanukovych, the former president of Ukraine, was there, they were saying that he was Putin's puppet. Now they have got President Zelensky. He is the West puppet. As I say, it's a Mexican standoff. It's a Russian roulette. These people know what they're doing. It's about control. It's about power. And I say, when two elephants they are fighting, is the grass that suffer. My concern are the civilians, people who have nothing to do with this. These things happen every day. We saw what happened in Libya. They were quiet because it was NATO. We saw what happened in Saddam Hussein. They were quiet because it was NATO. We saw what happened in other parts of the world. France doing in 14 African countries, it's NATO. France is an ally to NATO. Russia, they want to destroy it. I'm not justifying the position of Russia. I'm not justifying that. I'm anti-war. Whatever circumstances, I'm against war, because the people who suffer are the civilians. But when we talk about sovereignty, sovereignty is a mind. When the United Nations was created, all of us, most African countries, were not part of it. They were being subjugated under rules that were not part of it. So, as I said earlier, people like late President Mugabe and Gaddafi, they went there, they say, is it the Ezekiel agreement? They tender certain things that we should look into the United Nations and change it so that it should be balanced and fair for all of us. Most of these people is about power mongering. The West, they are fading. They are losing their power. As I say, I'm not supporting those who are fighting, but I will make this clear. When you sit today, you look at the geopolitics today, Russia have got China behind them, 1 billion people. Russia have got India behind them, 1 billion people. And if you look at the West is fading. They cannot believe they are losing power. I'm not interested in power. We have enough space. We as human beings, Homo sapiens, we can come together and live peacefully. But the problem is people like to flex their muscle. Europe is just 500 million people. And Russia is larger, China larger. They cannot believe it. My problem is we should forget about those days and we should look how we can work as human beings. We can say that a country is sovereign. No country is sovereign. The only sovereign country are the Western world, Russia. Most of the countries are being controlled. I can say China too is sovereign. Most of them, they control us. We live by their laws. We live by their rules. I look at this problem as a human being, not whether it's a Russian or you're European or you're African. But my point is, God works in a mysterious way. The balance of power is shifting. We are going to go back to the drawing board. We have to look how we can live as equal on this planet Earth.
I want us to go back to Boya and get another listen to the editor-in-chief of Media Freak Radio, Joseph Bueno. Tell us whether this is pushing Ukraine towards the West or rather keeping Ukraine amongst the nations that are pro-Russia. Maittre, Alex, I'll stay with you. Is this move pushing Ukraine further away from Russia towards the West, or Ukraine is going to have a rethink to stay closer to Russia?
The problem to me is not about, we have what we call national interest. I believe the people of Ukraine, they have the power to, or the right to live their life as they want to live. I don't believe in, you see, what we're having again is another Cold War, whether you go to Europe or whatsoever. To be honest, when we look at the interest, you have people who are Russians. They speak their local language. They live in Ukraine. So naturally, Ukraine have got a closer ties with Russia. Naturally, there are people, they speak the same language, the same culture. As President Putin was saying, that some of the former Soviet Union, Lenin, Khrushchev, they gave part of Ukraine. It was a gift to Ukraine, some of the breakaway republic. The problem is, if you were a local person who lives in Ukraine and your ethnicity is Russian and they want to take you to another angle to Europe, how will you feel? That's a natural instinct. So we are in a place, as I say, there's no win-win situation. These people, they are Russian living inside Ukraine, when I mean Russian. So the same with Crimea. These people live together. So you cannot, to me, to an angle, I don't like to blame anyone. I will put the blame more on the Western country. Because you cannot go somewhere where you have a family that they speak similar language, the same culture, and you want to draw them away. There will always be a trouble. It will not work. To some point, I'm not supporting what Putin is doing. But Putin, Russia have been a superpower before. He knows they want to eclipse them. He knows the Western countries want to put Russia at bay. So he wants to flex his muscle. As I say, to me, war is never a solution. The Western powers, they know Putin. Putin is their friend. They have been working together. But Putin is envisaging what is going to happen in the future. Putin is not in NATO. It's not part of NATO. They used to have Warsaw Pact. Practically, it's not existing. And at the end of the day, if Ukraine gets into NATO, Article 5 of NATO, is it the agreement or act or what, how do you call it? It says that an attack on one member state is an attack of all of them. So imagine if Ukraine gets into NATO, what will happen? So at the moment, I presume the European countries and NATO, they are praying that Ukraine was not part of NATO. If it was there, they would have been forced to attack Russia. Are they prepared to attack Russia and obliterate the surface of the earth? They are not willing to do that, because the difference between Putin and Hitler is that Putin have got nuclear weapons. Hitler did not have it. And if these people, they go ahead, they know they cannot do it I'm not God, I don't know. If they try to have a fight against Putin, Putin is an individual. The world might become, ever since I was young, they used to say the world is coming to an end in 1992 in primary school. I'm sure this is a moment that we have to be careful how we deal with this matter. And so far, I would say the Western world have been dealing with it properly in the sense that I don't see them attacking Mr. Putin, because you don't know, he's an individual. At times, an individual could be a suicide bomber. He can say, well, let me end this world and I go. So we are living in a very dangerous time, and it's very dangerous for all of us, no matter where we are. So I hope this Western country, as I say, I don't want to apportion blame to any country. I presume and I believe they will solve this problem peacefully.
They will solve this problem peacefully. Don't know whether Joseph Bueno is ready to react to the question whether this move is going to push Ukraine towards the West or to stay close to Russia. We can't get the sound.
That they will stand up to Russia, much harm. It is true, it may affect their economy, but it will not stop them from invading Ukraine. It would have sufficed for the US to at least stand tough, to tell the world that they will stand up to Russia should there be a military invasion. They had all the intel. They knew very well that with a military build-up in the border between Ukraine and Russia, Russia was preparing a full-scale invasion. But what did they do? Nothing. They talked and talked and talked, and today Ukraine is being invaded. It's just to prove that, we should learn. African countries should learn from what's happening today in Ukraine, that the problems of African countries can be resolved by African countries themselves. All the assurances they may be relying on from the West and other countries elsewhere is just a ploy on the part of these countries to sell weapons to the warring factions in these countries in Africa so that they can further devastate their countries. So, again, I say the Russian invasion of Ukraine is complete unprovoked aggression, and it has simply proven that the United Nations organization has outlived its usefulness and is today a talking workshop, and the US is following suit, and the allies in NATO who are clinging on to so-called sanctions that are not dissuading aggressors in the world. And its allies in NATO talking about sanctions. Since 2014, close to 7 years today.
Okay, thank you, Joseph. We know we're going to be coming back to you out there in Boya, Southwest regional capital. He is talking about the fact that the United Nations has not been able to help Ukraine. The U.S. already knew that there was going to be an invasion and did nothing. And he's saying that it is a wake-up call to African nations to know that in times of difficulty, they may just have to depend on themselves.
Effectivement, Monsieur Léo, au regard de ce qui est en train de se passer au jour d'aujourd'hui, on se rend compte que c'est un moment crucial pour le monde entier. Un moment très crucial pour le monde entier et un moment où des décisions stratégiques doivent être prises si l'on ne voudrait pas effectivement se retrouver dans une troisième guerre mondiale. Au jour d'aujourd'hui, on observe la Russie qui envahit l'Ukraine et personne ne peut rien faire. Même l'ONU ne fait rien. On se rend compte simplement que l'ONU, c'est une organisation qui n'a pas de sens. En fait, elle a toujours existé, mais elle n'existe pas. Puisqu'il est inadmissible qu'au jour d'aujourd'hui, jusqu'à ce moment, depuis jeudi matin, hier matin, que la Russie, le président de la Russie a décidé qu'il allait envahir l'Ukraine. L'ONU n'a rien fait comme action pratique. Est-ce qu'il n'y a pas une armée dans l'ONU? C'est la question à se poser au jour d'aujourd'hui. On se pose cette question et on n'arrive pas à avoir une réponse. On se dit donc simplement que l'ONU ne sert à rien. Elle ne sert absolument à rien à part peut-être à opprimer les pays africains, parce que lorsqu'il y a un conflit dans un pays africain, elle sera première à se déporter dans ce pays, non pour aider ce pays, mais peut-être pour voler l'or et le diamant dans ces pays en question. Au jour d'aujourd'hui, si les États-Unis ou l'Union européenne ne peut pas intervenir pour aider l'Ukraine, c'est, je vais dire, à leur risque et péril. Pourquoi? Parce que du moment où Poutine va terminer avec l'Ukraine, il va s'en prendre à un autre pays, et ainsi de suite, et ainsi de suite. Parce que si Poutine a eu le courage de dire que si quelqu'un essaye de s'immiscer dans ce conflit, il aura affaire à lui, il va agir de manière réactive. Il sait sur quelle tête, sur quel fondement il se pose avant d'avancer des propos pareils. Il sait sur quoi il compte. Donc, si au jour d'aujourd'hui, les pays européens n'arrivent pas à stopper Poutine dans cette action, qu'ils sachent une seule chose, c'est qu'après l'Ukraine, ce sera eux ensuite. Au jour d'aujourd'hui, l'Afrique doit tenir une leçon, ou bien deux, ou bien prendre une décision cruciale, c'est que soit ce conflit sera à leur avantage ou ce sera contre l'Afrique. Parce que si au jour d'aujourd'hui, les pays, peut-être les puissances, les grandes puissances de ce monde arrivent à se mettre en conflit, peut-être c'est un moment que on va dire simplement Dieu a choisi pour que les Africains puissent être libérés de cette oppression. Ou encore, malheureusement, ça va être encore comme à la Première ou à la Deuxième Guerre mondiale, où on a utilisé plutôt l'Afrique pour résoudre leurs problèmes.
Okay, Maittre Singer, the editor-in-chief of Mediafrique FM, is suggesting that this is a wake-up call to African nations to depend on themselves, because, as we see, seemingly nobody is coming to the assistance of Ukraine. I don't know. Is there a problem? Matt, did you get me? Did you get my question?
We have the potential that each time we depend on these people. When I see African nations, African EU summit, African China summit, African American summit, I ask myself, capability back at home and abroad of Africans who can do the same thing what the Western people are doing. We have 54 countries in Africa. Imagine 54. There is no one single permanent member of an African country in the United Nations. What we should know is that the day Africa will have a permanent member in the Security Council, that will be the end of the Security Council. The Security Council is a neo-colonial organization to me. You see, Mr. Putin, they cannot go to the Security Council because if one member abstains, that's the end of it. So the difference, United Nations Security Council or United, is for Africans, is to control us. And once as we understand this, then we will know where we are going to. It's very important that as Africans, we should know. I'm lucky that I live in Cameroon up to the extent of going to Yaoundé University. I've lived here. I can weigh both sides in Africa and this place. We are intelligent. We are capable to run our own things. We don't even need to be in the United Nations. But you understand, a lot of our leaders, they like to be there for their own personal reason. We can cooperate with other African countries, but we don't need to be in the United Nations. As I say, it saddens me to see what is happening in Ukraine, civilians, children, mothers, but I say it's a blessing in disguise to Africans. It's a blessing to tell Africans that you can do better. I won't sit here and say, Putin is bad or the West is good. Mr. Leo, you know what is happening in Africa. You know about the French Corporation. You know about what this guy, how do they call him, President Macron went to Chad and installed a dictator there. You know about those things. Nobody talk about invasion. But this is the double standard which I want Africans. Africans to see, to know that the only interests of Africans could be served by us Africans. If you rely on people, nothing will happen. I bet you, let me tell you the truth, the West will do nothing to Putin because Putin have got one of the most sophisticated weapons of mass destruction. If it was Gaddafi, they would have been there, no fly zone. If it was Saddam Hussein, they would have been there the next second. But they can do nothing to Putin. They can do nothing as things stands now. We can blame who we want to blame now. They know their game. That's why they don't want, Iran to have nuclear weapon. That's why they don't want North Korea to have nuclear weapon. Power is what? What is power? Power is nuclear weapon. If you take Nigerians to fight with America hand by hand, Nigerians, they will win. But the power is nuclear weapon. It's not hand by hand. It's not blown. So that is the truth. They don't want other countries to have it. They don't have powers. I'm just giving one African countries. Put them with any Western country. They cannot fight. So when they say power is nuclear weapon, if North Korea have got it as power, and it's high time Africans, they should be looking at their interests. We as Africans, all the countries, they have the right to have nuclear weapon for all Africans, not just for one country, all of us. It's either there's no nuclear weapon on planet universe or there's nuclear weapons. They control us because of that. And Putin, you'll be surprised, have got more nuclear capability than the entire European countries. That's something that people don't know. Britain have been trying to reduce theirs as other European countries, but Mr. Putin, he knows what he's doing. He knows that one day things gonna change. China is coming, Asia is coming, and I hope too that Africa should rise because we have got that capability.
Okay, we've got that capability. Carlson Ayaba is on standby from Yaoundé. Carlson, your first take on what is happening out there between Russia and Ukraine, but this call by Joseph Bueno for Africans to today know that you may just be depending on those who may never be able to help you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ndive, for bringing me to this program with special greetings to our panelists for their wonderful analysis. Now, to answer your question, I think what has happened has already happened. I totally condemn the fact that Russia, through Vladimir Putin, has decided to move into Ukraine and attack. But now, that is not what is important at this point. At this point, we need to look at what happens next. The actions which are going to happen from this point forward is going to determine if things are going to escalate or de-escalate. Now, what we are currently seeing as solutions being provided by the West or by the United States is something which is going to escalate the situation, because putting sanctions on Russia, Mr. Leo, 40% of the energy which the European countries depend on come from Russia and Ukraine. So indirectly, you cannot be proposing a solution which is going to cause more harm than good. Now, we need to look at when two people are fighting, you need to bring both of them and listen to their side of the story and not taking somebody's side before entering into the fight. I think what the West has been doing is trying to support Ukraine, not understanding the fact that they, the West, have been the ones provoking Russia up to this very point. When we look at how have they been provoking Russia, it's a very big question in history. This thing started in 1991, where the Soviet Union dissolved into other states. All these states have something common in them. Even Ukraine, which is there, which is trying to be being backed by the EU, does not use the euro as a currency, use their own currency, and most Ukrainians still align themselves to Russia. Now, we know that the Western media has always tried to paint a very black picture of Russia, and that is what many people have been digesting Russia as a victim. Meanwhile, Russia is not a victim. Now, to answer Joseph's Bueno question, everywhere we see America, for the last 4 years, we've not seen America involve itself in some kind of wars. The war was at peace, but now you are seeing America, and anywhere you see America's footprint, definitely you know that it's going to end up with destruction. We have many cases we can look at. We look at Iraq, they talk of weapons of mass destruction. We are in 2022, it has never been found. We look at the liberation which they wanted to bring in Libya. Libya is today termed a failed state. And you look at the fingerprints of America in every state, in every corner of the world, it always ends in danger. What we want to see in this war is more of an economic war than a political war. Why? Because for so long, America has been positioned itself as a world power. But recently, America has not been able to keep up technologically, economically, and politically. Therefore, it is time for somebody else to be able to have the world order lead. So if you see Russia doing this, America itself knows strategically that if they have to interfere or if they have to convince Ukraine to join NATO, it's going to mean war. At the same time, if they are not able to de-escalate the situation, it means America is going to lose their position as a world power. It's going to provoke North Korea into their attacks on South Korea. It's going to provoke China to continue their attacks on Taiwan. It's going to promote China's expansion in Africa, and it's going to promote Russia's occupation to take back all the territories in the USSR. So at this point, like I said, it is not about what happened yesterday. It is what happens next. The sanctions which the United States or the EU has given on Russia should not have been there. Where the best people to settle this conflict right now is between the Ukrainian government and the Russian government. The fact that the Ukrainian government had to withdraw Russian language from their constitution or from their national order is something which shows that the West is pushing. You cannot come to meet two people who are together and you want to isolate the language. So at the same time, what I'm saying is, at this point in time, the best people who can resolve this crisis is between Ukraine and Russia. And I think the Ukrainian president has been making intelligent calls to the Russian government. So we would expect Vladimir Putin to sit one-on-one to discuss. But if we are hoping on NATO or the EU to be able to intervene at this point, then we are just going to escalate this crisis more.
Okay, we move over to the Southwest region to get Joseph Bueno, Editor-in-Chief, Media Free Radio, come in once again.
Instead went on TV to say US soldiers will not be sent to Ukraine. And I think that is all the reassurance that Vladimir Putin of Russia needed to be able to go ahead with the invasion of Ukraine. Because once it became clear to them that the USA and the allies in NATO will not stand up to Russia militarily, they knew that sanctions will not do them much harm. It is true it may affect their economy, but they will not stop them from invading Ukraine. It would have sufficed for the US to at least stand tough, to tell the world that they will stand up to Russia should there be a military invasion. They had all the intel. They knew very well that with a military build-up in the border between Ukraine and Russia, Russia was preparing a full-scale invasion. But what did they do? Nothing. They talked and talked and talked, and today Ukraine is being invaded. It's just to prove that, we should learn. African countries should learn from what's happening today in Ukraine, that the problems of African countries can be resolved by African countries themselves. All the assurances they may be relying on from the West and other countries elsewhere is just a ploy on the part of these countries to sell weapons to the warring factions in these countries in Africa so that they can further devastate their countries. So, again, I say, America and the allies, we're going to impose the sanctions on them. We have an economic giant in the world like China that will not impose sanctions on Russia because it considers Russia an ally. We have Belarus and other pro-communist nations in the world that will continue to trade with Russia, thereby providing a cushion for Russia against the US imposed sanctions. So I think that this is just proving that the United Nations Organization is a toothless bulldog that has outlived its usefulness, and that can only back when third world countries and other smaller nations in the world are concerned. Because this is a real test. Would have loved to see the United Nations Organization stand up to a bully like Russia, Vladimir Putin of Russia, and call them to order. See what happened in the United States of America. US President Joe Biden. I think it is because of the weakness of US President Joe Biden and their allies that Russia has been emboldened to carry on with the invasion of Ukraine. Because they had intel early enough that Russia was preparing to invade Ukraine. And we saw it on all media outlets there. But what did they do? They kept talking about trying to appease, or better still, trying to visit Putin and see how they could talk him out of this. We've seen French President Emmanuel Macron run to Russia severally, met other world leaders to see how they could dissuade Putin from ordering an invasion.
Okay, Maittre Alex, when you look at the United Nations today, you think it's time for it to be overhauled, to change strategy and give it a new mandate?
Please say it again.
I'm asking about the United Nations. It is there to ensure that the world lives in peace. But when we observe what is unfolding in Europe between Ukraine and Russia, do you, like other persons, especially what Joseph Bueno just said, that the United Nations is proving very helpless in solving world problems and the need for it to be overhauled so that it be given a new mandate?
I agree with what he said, and as I said earlier, the League of Nations became obsolete. The United Nations was created without Nigeria's consent, without Cameroon, without Egypt, without South Africa, with all African countries. They created something which, to me, it's my opinion, the United Nations is a neo-colonialist organization. We were not existing as a nation when it was created, and they are refusing to revisit it. You see, the United Nations, you have to be United Nations is about the Security Council, because that's where the power is. The Secretary General is just a poodle. You see, you have people like China have got a veto power. You know what is a veto power. When you say no, it means you say no. You see, Russia have got a veto power. England, there's no African country that have got a veto power there. So when we talk about United Nations, I've never been a fan of United Nations. The United Nations knows that if you say one country, one vote is over, countries like Africa and South America and developing countries, they will be dominating it. So it was a plan, because as us Africans, we don't see in advance. These people see in advance, they know what's going to happen. Then they have a non-permanent position. You saw what happened before the invasion of President Saddam Hussein. When they knew, the Americans, they knew that if they go to the Security Council, countries like France and other countries would veto it. What did they do? They said, it's President George Bush said, I'm going to do a preemptive action to defend our country. And they invaded President Saddam Hussein, and he was killed. They did not say, let us take him to the ICC. They allowed him to be tried by his own people because there was capital punishment that they know they will kill him. So they did not say, let's go to the ICC. All these international institutions, we need to change them. They were made for the Caucasian. They were made for the Western people. You see, the same thing. They cannot say, I heard what my brother from Boya, is it Joseph, saying. It's right what he's saying. The United Nations is a useless organization. I'm telling you, it's useless. What I mean, I'm speaking as an African, it does not help us. When they talk about peacekeeping forces, they know if they step foot in Ukraine, power is what, as I said, nuclear weapon. When they heard that Saddam wanted to have it, they were against Saddam. Gaddafi, they said. Iran, they said. My point is, who gave them that right to have nuclear weapon and ask other people not to have it? That is where we are. It's either us, as the people of this universe, we come together and decide that we have a nuclear weapon for the whole world, that we deal with it as human beings, or we do away with it. Why should we be keeping weapons of mass destruction, something that can destroy the whole world? It's about flexing your muscle. It's either we say we don't want it at all in this universe. Why should we keep it? As I speak like this, if Russia said I want to wipe out London now, I'm gone as I'm talking here. As I speak like this, about 137 people have died in Ukraine. 316 have been wounded. Why us as human beings we are killing each other? But I understand that charity begins at home. And whenever things happen on this universe, I first look at that's where my heart is. First. But however, as a human being, I hate seeing people killing each other. And let me tell you, the United Nations is useless. These people know that when we come to reform it, the balance of power will shift. And it's going to happen one day. Very soon. In 10 years' time, in 15 years' time, things are going to change. My brothers and sisters in Europe, they have to learn that things are changing. And it has to change. Our people are aware. One of the good things we have today, as we see today, Mr. Leo, we are talking, this social media will change a lot of things. Before we could not speak, we could not say certain things. Things will change for the better. And it's high time that our European partners, including Russia. What Russia is doing, let me tell you the truth, the West is doing the same thing. That's why I don't like double standard. I've cited it. Palestinian, I love them. I love Israel. They are invading Palestinians' territory. What's different from what Putin is doing? It's not different. So the problem is the double standard. You cannot have one rule for somebody and you have another rule for another person. That's why we are suffering on this planet Earth. It's either there's one rule for all of us or there's no rule at all, or we'll go back to the state of nature. So it's very important. And to me, it's time for us to revisit the United Nations. It's obsolete. We need a new union. I know Europe, they will lose power if we go and revisit it. Imagine giving African countries a veto power. If you want to attack Libya, the African country will go against it. That would have been the end of the European Union. That's why they don't want it. If Africa had got a veto power, the UN security is over. So at the moment, they have powers. The UN is to suppress countries like Africa and other developing nations. So to me, I've never been a fan of the UN, and I will never be, because it's not fair, it's not balanced, it's not working in the interest of African countries.
Okay, Maittre, thank you. Gwladys, we must also understand that as we engage in conflicts, we're going to be having issues with, we are going to be having refugee crisis from persons who may be fleeing from Ukraine to other neighboring countries. But within Ukraine itself, we're going to have many casualties here.
Effectivement, Monsieur Léo, on parle au jour d'aujourd'hui de près de 20 000 étudiants camerounais qui sont en Ukraine en ce moment. Et jusqu'à ce moment, je ne pense pas que le gouvernement camerounais a déjà mis sur pied un processus peut-être pour les enlever de ce lieu, peut-être pour protéger leur vie, on ne sait jamais.
I just read something on social media. I'm still investigating on it, seemingly from the government. Yeah.
Ok, parce que déjà jusqu'ici, quand même, on a vu les pays comme le Ghana qui ont déjà envoyé des avions pour enlever leurs citoyens, le Nigeria aussi. Donc, on espère aussi que le Cameroun fera pareil. Mais au regard de tout ceci, Monsieur Léo, je suis en train de parler d'enlever les citoyens camerounais dans cette partie du monde, mais j'ai mal à l'intérieur de moi parce que je me dis, au jour d'aujourd'hui, c'est comme si tout le monde abandonne l'Ukraine à elle-même. Tout le monde l'abandonne à son sort. Et qu'en est-il des populations de ce pays? Qu'en est-il des civils de ce pays? C'est la question qui me taraude l'esprit à chaque fois que je pense à OK, que tout le monde enlève quand même ses citoyens de l'Ukraine. Au jour d'aujourd'hui, Monsieur Léo, je voudrais dire que si le président Poutine est arrivé jusqu'à ce niveau, ce n'est pas en vain. Si il ne voudrait pas que au jour d'aujourd'hui, parce qu'on se dit qu'il n'y a pas une raison palpable, mais j'ai cru lire dans les réseaux sociaux, sur Internet, que la raison ici, c'est qu'il ne voudrait pas que l'Ukraine soit soit nucléairement indépendant. Donc c'est ça en fait le problème de la Russie à ce niveau. Je pense que Maître Alex Ndive a élaboré dessus. Il a parlé de quelque chose dans ce genre. Pourquoi est-ce que certains pays ont le droit d'avoir du nucléaire et d'autres pays n'en ont pas ce droit? Pourquoi est-ce que au jour d'aujourd'hui, l'ONU qui interdisait aux autres pays d'avoir le nucléaire ne peut pas intervenir dans le cas de l'Ukraine en ce moment? On se rend compte que effectivement l'ONU is useless, comme tout le monde a dit.
Okay, they may not be living up to expectations, but it is also going to be very difficult to say they are completely useless because they have things that they are doing across the globe. This one says, good morning, sir. Your panelists keep on saying some Ukrainians have history with Russia. Is that an excuse for Russia to invade Ukraine? And if that is the case, Russia should also invade Poland and its neighbors because some of their citizens have history with Russia. There was never an invasion in Cuba during the US-Russia crisis. Why must Ukraine be invaded? Because of their connection with NATO. Now, Carlson Ayaba I want to get back to you. Are we witnessing a move to re-establish a new world order?
Yes, Mr. Leo, I think this is clearly a move to establish a new world order, and I'll explain. Currently, the new world order is being backed by the US dollar. That's the American currency. But when you look at President Joe Biden's speech yesterday, he made mention of something, that the sanctions which they are going to put on Russia is not going to cause any disruption to the current flow of energy from Russia to the rest of the world. Now, Russia supplies is the second highest producer of oil in the world. Whatever you do to Russia now is either going to plummet their oil sales or increase their oil sales, because now, since they can shut down oil flow to the rest of the world, they can increase their prices. It's basic economics. So in this case, I think Vladimir Putin has particularly calculated his risk, and he sees that his profits are more than his risk, because there is no way that the US or any other person can shut down oil going to the rest of the world, and oil from Russia going to the rest of the world, which means Russia can therefore add its prices, sell this oil at the higher cost, and establish a new world order. So if you want to look, why do you think the US has a very deep particular interest in Ukraine? I'll explain to you something which we should not forget. You remember that when President Trump was in power, he did an investigation which he was almost impeached, and that investigation found something very terrible, that Joe Biden, through his son, was the vice president of an oil company in Ukraine. It showed that Hillary Clinton had business dealings with the Ukrainian government in oil company. It also showed former Secretary of State John Kerry had business dealings in Ukraine. So if you see the US panicking at this very time, what Russia is trying to do is to destabilize what the corrupt US government has been doing many years in the dark, and to topple the US government, to topple the US dollar in particular, means a new world order is going to be established. We cannot be dependent on the US. There are many basic programs around the world which the US, when we say the US is the same thing as the UN and NATO, because it's the US which controls all these powers. We know it is not hide the truth. It controls the United Nations, the US controls NATO, the US has a lot of influence on the EU. So when we talk about basic problems around the world which the US cannot solve, we can look at Somalia. The US has tried, it has never been able to solve the problems in Somalia. He has never been able to solve the problems between Israel and Pakistan. He has never been able to solve the problems in Syria. He has never been able to solve even the problems which we have here in Cameroon concerning the crisis. So the US has already expired. We should say technologically advanced. If we look at technological advancement, China has already beaten the US. If we look at economic advancement, Russia and China combined are already beating the US. So we are already seeing a new world order being set in. Probably could this attack on Ukraine be the way that this order can be set in? I don't know. But what is certain is that the US has lost a lot of ground over the last 3 or 4 years, and many people now are challenging it. If you look at China's military, China has a very decent military compared to the United States. The number of warships, the number of air tanks. If you look at China's economy, China's economy is very large. The same thing if you look at Russia. Russia has a very big defense force, a very big economic force. So if you look at the US agitating, it's because they're already so threatened. You look at the US debt, it is already at $30 trillion. If you topple the US dollar as foreign currency, there is no way that the US government can pay this debt. So if you see the agitating so much, it's because it's clear that Russia is ready, or China is ready to take as world order. And we should not even imagine if Russia and China decide to combine as one. We are already setting that a new world order will be formed.
Okay, we move over again to the Southwest Regional Capital, where Joseph Bueno is coming in to contribute to our discussion on the Russia-Ukraine crisis.
The United Nations, I think it's just proven again, the UN has just proven again that they are just a wet blanket, a toothless bulldog that can do nothing. This is aggression we're talking about here. This is a sovereign state that is being overrun here by another country. And all we're hearing is sanctions and sanctions. We're hearing UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres outright pleading like a baby, calling on Russia to call its troops back home. We're going past the stage where we should be hearing about condemnations and all of that. If it were a third world country, if it were another country somewhere else, we would have seen deployment of troops to that country. But today, because it's another superpower, we're seeing how powerless the United Nations organization are. We're seeing how powerless the United States of America and their allies in NATO are in the face of Russian aggression. We're talking about sanctions left, right, and center. Did these sanctions stop Russia from annexing Crimea in 2014? No. Have these sanctions stopped Russia from overrunning, invading Ukraine today? No. Russia has taken its time and prepared well against the sanctions that it knows the United States of America and their allies will impose on them. Besides, let's not forget the fact that a lot of countries in Europe out there depend almost entirely.
Okay. Sanctions, Maittre, Alex, is this going to deter in any way Russia? Would Vladimir Putin actually be disturbed by the sanctions that are meted out on him? We saying that he was unaware of the fact that these sanctions were going to follow his invasion of Ukraine?
Hello?
Yes, Matt.
Mr. Leo, is that question for me?
Yes, for you, Matt.
Could you repeat it again, please?
Okay, my question to you has to do with the sanctions on Russia. Now, placing the sanctions on Russia, we have seen the United States, the UK, the EU, and Canada, and a host of nations. Are we saying that Putin was unaware that sanctions were going to follow any invasion of Ukraine? Is Putin not aware and has made sufficient dispositions to be able to live up to them?
No, I told you Mr. Putin is 100% aware that they were going to sanction Russia. And that's why earlier on this program I said Russia have got oil reserve, or what about 630 billion, the fourth largest amount of reserve in the world. But I said only 16% of Russian foreign exchange is held in dollars. So they prepare. It's not a mistake. They were aware of what they are doing, and the West knew. But as I say, the difference between Mr. Putin and Saddam Gaddafi is that this man have got weapons of mass destruction. The reason they are using sanctions is that they cannot fight each other. You cannot fight a country that have got weapon of mass destruction. So at the end of the day, all of them, they are aware. When they say intelligence, Russia had the intelligence, the West have the intelligence, but there is a problem. I want to come back because one of your televiewers said that some of us on the panel, we are supporting because Russia invaded, Ukraine, because Ukraine, they have something in common. Let me tell you something. Most countries on earth, their main countries are created within ethnicities. England is a country, it's made up of English people. Scotland is Scottish people. Wales is an Irish and French and German. So when we come to countries like Ukraine and other African countries, it's a mixture of so many ethnicities. You don't create countries, artificial countries, by mixing Igbo with Yoruba. It doesn't work. That's why we have trouble in Africa. That's why we have trouble in the Cameroons and other parts. Most countries are made between. People can agree. Igbo, Yoruba, they sit side by side like the four countries in the United Kingdom. So in Ukraine, you have Russians. They are the largest ethnic minority in the world, Russians inside there. So that's the trouble when you have people of different ethnicities. And if you don't create a form of government that helps everybody inside that country, you always have trouble. Okay. It's not one size fits it all. In England, the Scottish, they do their own thing. They have their parliament. Irish, the same or what. So, but in a country that you want to make one size fit it all. So Russia is using an excuse to say, I'm coming to protect people who have the same tribe or language with me. It is normal. Let's not pretend. Okay. When I see something that happens in Africa, it affects me right in London. Why? Because I'm an African. So those feelings are everywhere. It's nature. So we cannot sit and say Putin should keep quiet or whatsoever. As I say, I'm anti-war. It's high time we sit as a people and say the League of Nations are source its time at certain time. The UN to have done the same thing. But the problem now is that these people, they know if we should sit and talk about a new United Nations, it's going to favor countries like African countries. So that is the problem. To me, I'm a little bit selfish because I want to see Africa to rise and be at the forefront of the world economy. So it's an opportunity for Africa. While I'm against war, but it's an opportunity for Africa. It's a blessing for Africa. Robert Mugabe said it, Gaddafi said it, that the UN is obsolete. Long ago they said these things. They gave a proposal, they refused.
Thank you.
So the UN have failed, and to be honest, the UN can do nothing to Russia. When it comes to military might, they can't do it. Once as you have a nuclear weapon, they can't do that. Sanctions takes time, but Mr. Putin is also ready to do the same thing. When we look in terms, Mr. Putin, I'm sure China is behind Mr. Putin, India is behind Mr. Putin. So at the end of the day, the solution, they will sit on the table. That's why sometimes I love Western countries, because if they have problem, they will have to realize that we cannot fight, and they sit and they solve their problem on the table, because war is never a solution anywhere, any part in the whole world.
Thank you very much, Maittre. We hope to have you in subsequent special editions on My Media Prime TV. We are glad to have had you this morning.
Thank you very much, and it's also a pleasure to share my opinion with our people back home and the world at large. Stay blessed.
Okay, we also want to say thank you to you, Carlson Ayaba, for participating in this edition of special edition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Leo, for this short notice. We should remember that the United Nations or the US and the EU have their own problems to solve. Right now, President Macron has elections to fight for in April. Britain's decision to leave the European Union, Brexit, they also have to deal with that economically. Britain is not viable. Then we look at the blunders which in Afghanistan, pulling all the troops and leaving out France, the nuclear submarine deal. So the EU and the US, they still have their own strengths which they need to adjust. We cannot just think that they have to confront Russia. Have a nice day, Mr. Lee.
Thank you to Joseph Bueno, who took part on this edition of the program from Boya Southwest Regional Capital, the editor-in-chief of Media Freak Radio. We want also to thank you, Gwladys, for being part of this edition.
C'était un plaisir pour moi d'être sur ce panel.
We want to thank Faith Tata, as well as Lasha Kingsley, who all worked to produce this, as well as Johnson Eli and the entire house. We want to also say stay blessed. Bye-bye.